Now that we know what a least common denominator is, the purpose of this clip is to show you how we use the least common denominator. There are basically three areas that you need to be able to recognize. First, how do we use the least common denominator to simplify complex fractions? Second, how do we use the least common denominator to add fractions? And then last but not least, how do we use the least common denominator to solve rational expressions? This is an example of a complex fraction where we have fractions within a big fraction. And what we do with the least common denominator here is we multiply the numerator and the denominator by the least common denominator. In this case, the least common denominator is x minus 2 times x plus 1. And so what we do is we multiply the numerator and the denominator by x minus 2 times x plus 1. As you can see, in the parentheses is the original complex fraction, and we multiply the numerator and denominator. You should be able to follow the algebra here. And what I did in the first case is just distribute this least common denominator over each term in the numerator and the denominator, and you should be able to follow this. From here to here, I distributed the x and I foiled these binomials. And what you have to be careful here is that we are going to distribute the negative at the end and get the following expression. So the difference between here and here is that we've distributed the negative down in the denominator. And from here to here we collect like terms. Now most students think that we're finished here, but if we can factor and simplify even further, that is the desired result. And so the move from here to here is that we factor the 2 out and the negative out to see if we can factor this binomial up top and this trinomial down below. And as you can see, from here to here we were able to. The final answer, since the x minus 1's cancel, is this expression: 2 times the quantity x plus 1 over x minus 2. And remember, x still can't be negative 1 or 2 because it's this expression here that we're trying to simplify. This is an example of how we add fractions using the least common denominator. The first thing we need to do, if we have to factor, both denominators need to be factored. The denominator of the first one already is factored, but the denominator in the second term needs to be factored at x plus 1 times x minus 2. And from this stage to this stage, we need to express each fraction with that least common denominator. The first fraction needs to be multiplied top and bottom by x minus 2. And the second denominator the fraction already has the least common denominator. And from there, once we have the denominators, we keep that denominator and then we add the numerators. Some students like to just eliminate the denominator. We have to keep it when we add fractions. And the next stage is to collect like terms. And if we can factor the numerator, we do that. And if we can simplify, we further simplify. The final answer to this problem, since the x plus 1's cancel, is x minus 4 over x minus 2. Again, since it's the original that we're trying to simplify, x still can't be negative 1 or 2. Last but not least is how do we use the least common denominator to solve rational equations. This is an example of a rational equation, and as we can see, again, the least common denominator is x minus 2 and x plus 1. So what do we do differently here? Well, what we do in this situation is we multiply both sides of the equation by the least common denominator. And it looks like this. The least common denominator again is x minus 2 times x plus 1, and we multiply both sides. Now just be careful, follow the algebra here. When I multiply this least common denominator times this term, the x minus 2's cancel, and I have x times x plus 1. And on the right side, I'm left with just x plus 2. So we get an equation without a denominator. And now all we need to do is just clean it up. Collect like terms, distribute, and we get the following. Again, collecting like terms, and setting this equation equal to 0 is the way to go, because we want to use the zero product property if we can. And so when we factor out the x, we get x times x 2x minus 1, and then using the zero product property, we get x is 0 or 1/2. Now, one of the things I should have mentioned in the beginning from the very beginning, x couldn't be 2 or -1, and since neither of these answers are, these are the answers. You should also check that these are the right answers, and they are. I have already made that check, and you can see for yourself that these two will work. So in summary, I showed you how we simplify complex fractions, added fractions, and how we solved rational equations. You just need to remember that the least common denominator is used differently in each of these three cases. In the case of simplifying complex fractions, we multiplied numerator and denominator by the least common denominator. In the case of adding fractions, we expressed each denominator with the least common denominator. And in the case of solving rational equations, we multiply both sides of the equation by the least common denominator. These are the three situations that you need to be very comfortable with.